She whispered, "Close the curtains," and suddenly, the office didn't feel so private anymore. The office had a quiet, almost fragile calm that morning. I arrived early, the sun still low over the city skyline, brushing golden streaks across the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, punctuated occasionally by distant traffic. I liked these early hours. The world hadn't fully woken yet, and the office felt like it was ours alone, a place where the usual rush of deadlines hadn't yet seeped in. She appeared without warning, as she often did, moving through the space with a composed grace that somehow made the office seem smaller, warmer. My boss, she was 42, confident in her presence, yet there was a softness about her that only surfaced in moments like this. Her blouse whispered against the polished wood floor as she walked past my desk, and I caught a faint trace of her perfume, something floral, understated, calming. I noticed the way her gaze lingered on me for just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't overt, but there was an awareness there, a subtle acknowledgement of my presence that went beyond professional courtesy. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my attention kept drifting. When she reached the blinds, I could see her fingers lightly grazing the edge, testing the sunlight streaming in. The warmth of the sun contrasted with the cool air of the office, and I felt it even from where I sat. There was something almost intimate about the way she moved, like she existed fully in the moment, aware of every detail, the rustle of papers, the soft echo of footsteps, the quiet rhythm of our breathing in shared space. Then came the whisper, a small, almost secretive sound that caught me off guard. She leaned slightly closer, and her voice was low enough that I had to focus to catch it. "Close the curtains," she said, a gentle directive, almost playful in tone. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from the words themselves, but from the way they were delivered, soft, deliberate, and carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. There was no one else in the office. Just her, me, and the quiet that wrapped around us like a fragile cocoon. I smiled inwardly and replied, quietly, teasing just enough to match the tone, "Already did." Even as I spoke, I could feel the subtle shift in the air, the brush of tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but electric. It wasn't a moment of overt desire, not yet. It was something quieter, more profound, awareness, curiosity, and the first flutter of connection between two people who had yet to explore the space between professional respect and something more. That morning, the office felt different. Warmer. Fuller. The day had begun, yes, but in that quiet, sunlit room, a subtle spark had already been lit, and neither of us could ignore it. The office had taken on a different mood by late afternoon. The sunlight had softened to a muted gold, casting long shadows across the walls and the polished desk surfaces. It was quieter now, the usual hum of phones and keyboards fading into the background. Somehow, the stillness made everything more intense, the rustle of papers, the faint click of a pen, even the subtle movement of her presence seemed amplified. She approached my desk with her usual poise, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The way she moved always seemed effortless, each gesture deliberate, yet natural. I noticed her hand brush lightly against the edge of my chair as she leaned over a stack of documents. It was barely a touch, just enough to create a fleeting awareness that sent a curious warmth through me. Her eyes met mine, lingering for a heartbeat longer than was strictly necessary, and I caught a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. Then came the whisper. She leaned just slightly closer, and her voice dropped so low I had to lean in without thinking. "Close the curtains," she murmured. There was no command in it, only a soft, intimate suggestion, as though she were inviting me into a quiet secret. The words themselves were simple, but the way they were delivered, the slight tilt of her head, the subtle catch in her breath, made it feel loaded with meaning. It wasn't something overt, not yet, but it tugged at an unspoken curiosity between us, a tension that had been simmering beneath our professional interactions. I let a small, teasing smile curve my lips and replied quietly, "Already did." My voice was steady, but I could feel the warmth creeping up my neck, a response to her nearness, the quiet electricity of that moment. Her eyes flicked down for just a second, then returned to mine, carrying a glimmer of acknowledgement, almost like a silent conversation passing between us. The air between us felt different after that, thicker, more aware. The sunlight slanted across the room, catching the highlights in her hair, brushing her cheek with a warm glow. I noticed the soft sound of her breathing, the subtle movements as she shifted her weight. Every small gesture, the tap of her fingers on the papers, the rustle of her blouse, suddenly felt magnified, as if the world had narrowed to the two of us in that quiet office. It was a small moment, but it lingered. Neither of us moved too quickly to define it, and that was part of its magic. The whisper, the glance, the faint brush of our proximity, it was a slow, deliberate spark. It wasn't about words or actions, it was about noticing, being present, feeling the quiet pull of something unspoken. That afternoon, the office no longer felt like just a workplace. It had become a stage for subtle intrigue, and for the first time, I realized that even the smallest gestures could carry a weight neither of us wanted to ignore. The office felt different after hours, the kind of quiet that made every small sound seem magnified. The hum of the air conditioner became a low, comforting background, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling subtly with her perfume. I stayed a few minutes longer than usual, ostensibly finishing paperwork, though I was acutely aware of her presence across the room. She, too, lingered, gathering files slowly, as if savoring the calm that fell between us. Our conversation began as it always did, with work, but gradually drifted into personal territory, the topics flowing almost unnoticed. She shared a story from the weekend, her voice lighter, tinged with amusement. I laughed softly, noticing the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the warmth in her expression that only surfaced when she was relaxed. It was easy to forget, in these moments, that she was my boss. The professional barrier seemed to thin, replaced by something more human, more immediate. As we talked, I noticed the subtle gestures that punctuated our words. Her hand would brush against the papers on the desk, and occasionally, our fingers would come close enough to almost touch. The awareness of it made my chest tighten slightly, a quiet, thrilling tension. She leaned in when she emphasized a point, and I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her body even across the few feet between us. Her presence was magnetic, calm, composed, yet quietly intimate. The office light softened as the sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched across the walls. She leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful, and for a moment she seemed vulnerable in a way I had never seen. She admitted, almost in passing, that sometimes the responsibilities felt heavy, that the weight of decision-making could be isolating. I listened, giving her my full attention, and felt a protective, instinctive urge to offer comfort. The space between us was charged with a quiet intimacy, not romantic yet, but deeply human, a connection forged in trust and attention. Her laughter returned as she recounted a minor misstep from earlier in the week, soft and melodic, and I caught myself leaning just slightly closer, drawn in by the ease of this moment. It was a delicate dance, closeness without crossing boundaries, shared attention without words needing to spell out the undercurrent of curiosity that pulsed between us. By the time we both stood to leave, the office felt smaller, warmer, somehow different from the sterile space it usually was. That evening, I realized that these small moments, shared stories, lingering glances, the almost touch of fingers, were quietly building a bond. Something was growing, subtle yet undeniable, and I found myself looking forward to the next moment we could share in this quiet, unspoken space between professionalism and something more. The day had been unusually hectic, deadlines pressing from every direction, yet somehow, by late afternoon, the office had calmed. Papers were stacked neatly on desks, phones had stopped ringing, and the city outside seemed to slow its pulse in tandem with ours. She remained at her desk, slightly hunched over a report, and I noticed the tension in her shoulders, a subtle stiffness that belied her usual composed presence. There was a quiet vulnerability to her at that moment, a softness that only appeared when she believed no one was truly watching. I approached her desk under the pretense of asking a question about a minor detail in a report, but I could feel the shift in the air before I even spoke. Her eyes met mine, and there was a flicker there, a quiet acknowledgement that she needed someone to simply listen. Without thinking, I leaned against the edge of her desk, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against me, but careful to respect the invisible boundary between us. Her voice was lower than usual, softer, as she confessed the stress she had been holding in. "Sometimes it feels like it's all too much," she admitted, the words almost a whisper, fragile and honest. There was no trace of pride or performance in her tone, just a human moment, raw and sincere. I nodded, letting her know I understood, and offered reassurance in my own quiet way. "I know it's a lot," I said gently. "But you handle it better than anyone I know." She glanced down, a brief blush warming her cheeks, and then looked back at me, eyes searching, almost hesitant. For a heartbeat, we simply held that gaze, the silence saying more than words ever could. I could sense the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the faint perfume lingering closer now, a quiet intimacy that felt both thrilling and grounding. Her fingers rested on the edge of her desk, near mine, and I didn't move them away. The closeness was electric, yet safe, a delicate tension that neither of us wanted to break. In that moment, the office ceased to feel like a workplace. It became a space for trust, for connection, for quiet acknowledgement that there was more between us than professional courtesy. The vulnerability she displayed drew me in, not in a rush of desire, but with a steady pull of admiration and care. I felt protective, respectful, and profoundly aware of how much she trusted me in sharing this small piece of herself. By the time she returned to her work, the tension had shifted, not gone, but transformed into a shared understanding. We were no longer just boss and employee, we were two people quietly aware of each other, learning the rhythm of subtle closeness, and beginning to navigate the complex pull of something unspoken, something just beyond the boundary of propriety. The office was quiet again, later in the evening than usual. Papers were scattered across desks, the hum of the fluorescent lights above providing a soft, constant background. I was reorganizing some files when she appeared behind me, carrying a stack of documents that seemed heavier than necessary. Her presence always carried a weight of awareness, quiet, confident, and magnetic all at once. We worked side by side, our shoulders brushing occasionally as we reached for the same folder or shifted papers across the desk. Each accidental touch made my chest tighten, a low, thrilling tension that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't urgent or desperate, just a quiet, steady pull, an awareness of proximity that left our movements more deliberate, our gestures more thoughtful. Even the smallest interaction became charged, from the brush of her fingers against mine to the soft slide of her chair as she leaned in to check a detail. Her laughter broke the quiet, light and melodic, when I commented on a minor misstep she had made earlier. It was effortless, but something about the way her eyes met mine, the subtle tilt of her head as she smiled, made my pulse quicken. I noticed her perfume mingling with the faint scent of the paper and ink around us, a combination that made the air feel intimate, personal, as though the office itself had contracted around us. For a moment, our hands hovered near each other while reaching for the same document. Neither pulled away immediately. The touch was fleeting, accidental, but just long enough to leave a warmth lingering on my skin. I felt the rise and fall of her breath as she leaned slightly closer, and it was enough to make my mind acutely aware of the quiet electricity between us. I caught myself hesitating, aware of the unspoken line between desire and propriety. I wanted to step back, to maintain the distance expected of a professional environment, but a part of me wanted to stay, to savor this slow, careful closeness. She seemed to feel the same, her own movements deliberate yet natural, as if she too was navigating the tension with careful attention. Even in this ordinary office task, there was intimacy, the shared laughter, the accidental touches, the quiet awareness of each other's presence. It was a dance of restraint and curiosity, a balance between professional respect and the undeniable pull of something more. When the work was done, we stepped back, and the space between us returned to normal, but the memory of those fleeting touches, lingering glances, and shared warmth stayed behind. The office no longer felt like just a workplace, it was a stage for a subtle, growing connection, one neither of us wanted to define too quickly, yet neither could ignore. It was later than usual, the office nearly deserted except for the soft glow of desk lamps and the dimming city lights filtering through the blinds. The quiet had a weight to it, almost like the building itself was holding its breath. We were alone, the usual rhythm of work replaced by a hushed stillness that made every sound, the scratch of a pen, the subtle shuffle of papers, seem magnified. The air between us was charged, not in haste or urgency, but with a slow, deliberate tension that neither of us had fully acknowledged until now. She looked up from the documents she was reviewing, and for a moment, her eyes met mine. There was something unspoken there, a vulnerability that hadn't been present before. "I enjoy having you here," she whispered, almost shyly, her voice low enough that it felt like it was meant only for me. It was not a confession of romance in words, but a subtle acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing between us over weeks of shared moments, soft laughter, and fleeting touches. I felt my heart tighten, the pull between propriety and desire becoming almost tangible. The memory of our earlier brushes of hands, the warmth of her presence, the quiet vulnerability she had shared, all of it crystallized in that single moment. "I enjoy being here too," I replied, voice steady but layered with the same mixture of anticipation and hesitation. "More than I probably should." Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement that we were both aware of the delicate line we were walking. She shifted slightly closer, just enough that the warmth of her body brushed against mine as she reached for a pen. The movement was casual, yet the intimacy and proximity was undeniable. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the delicate scent of her perfume blending with the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air, and it made the room feel suspended outside of time. For a long moment, we simply worked side by side, the unspoken tension wrapping around us like a quiet promise. No dramatic gestures, no hurried declarations, just two people fully aware of the electric closeness between them, each breath, each small movement, laden with the weight of feeling. Our fingers brushed again as we exchanged a document, a fleeting touch that lingered longer than necessary, and neither of us pulled away immediately. It was a confession of feeling without words, a quiet, intimate acknowledgement that this connection, careful, respectful, and emotionally deep, had grown into something undeniable. The office lights flickered softly overhead, golden city light pooling across the desks, and in that cocoon of quiet, we both recognized the pull, the desire, and the shared vulnerability that had quietly bound us together. The office had finally quieted for the evening. The usual clatter of keyboards and ringing phones was gone, replaced by the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional distant murmur of the city outside. The light was golden and fading, filtered through the curtains she had asked me to close weeks ago, a detail that now felt symbolically intimate, as though the world beyond these walls no longer mattered for a brief, suspended moment. She approached my desk, her steps deliberate but unhurried, carrying the aura of calm confidence she always had. Yet there was something different this time, an openness in her eyes, a gentle warmth that reached across the small distance between us. She leaned slightly, resting a hand briefly near mine on the edge of the desk. The gesture was subtle, almost casual, but I felt the quiet electricity it carried. Our fingers brushed lightly, not by accident but with the kind of care that made my pulse quicken. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a sincerity that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. "For your help, and for understanding." Her eyes held mine, steady and unflinching, yet gentle, as though acknowledging the unspoken tension that had been building between us for weeks. There was no rush in her words, no expectation, just honesty and quiet connection. I smiled, letting my fingers linger near hers a moment longer. "You don't have to thank me," I replied, my voice calm but layered with meaning. "I enjoy being here, with you." The words felt weighty, careful, yet undeniably true. There was a softness in the room, a warmth in the quiet that neither of us wanted to break. For a heartbeat, we simply stayed there, side by side, absorbing the shared understanding between us. Then she moved slightly closer, offering a gentle touch, a hand lightly brushing mine, a soft squeeze of reassurance. It was an acknowledgement of trust, of mutual feeling, of the quiet bond we had nurtured through laughter, subtle touches, and lingering glances. I responded in kind, returning the gesture with care, letting the closeness speak louder than words. The curtains remained closed, shielding our private moment from the outside world. In that cocoon of golden light and gentle warmth, the office had transformed. What had started as professional decorum had grown into something more, subtle, respectful, and profoundly human. Our connection, tempered by restraint and understanding, had blossomed into a quiet intimacy that neither of us wanted to define too quickly, yet neither could ignore. As we finally prepared to leave, we shared a small, lingering smile, a promise of understanding, a recognition of the bond that had grown between us. The office lights dimmed, the city outside continued its rhythm, but for those final moments, it felt as if time had slowed, leaving only the warmth, trust, and subtle intimacy of two people discovering the quiet depth of connection, and the gentle, enduring start of something more. If you enjoyed this slow burn story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a tale of love, tension, and quiet connections. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in a moment like this?